They were first used during the Second World War, and the US military made wide use of them in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Cluster munitions have also been used in Ukraine before by both sides. Ukraine needs them because it and its Western backers are running out of artillery ammunition. By April this year, the US had shipped 1.5 million 155mm shells. But the counteroffensive is devouring huge amounts of ammo, more than 8,000 rounds a day. The US military has been advising the White House for a while that it should send cluster munitions, known as dual-purpose improved conventional munitions, or DPICMs. And now President Biden has, controversially, agreed.
Russia has been using cluster munitions indiscriminately since the start of this war in order to attack Ukraine. By contrast, Ukraine is seeking DPICM rounds in order to defend its own sovereign territory. Second, compared to Russian cluster munitions, the DPICM rounds we will provide Ukraine have an extremely low failure or dud rate. The DPICM ammunition we are delivering to Ukraine will consist only of those with a dud rate less than 2.35%. Compare that to Russia, which has been using cluster munitions across Ukraine with dud rates of between 30 and 40%.
This is why the Ukrainians want them. Russia's built deep fortified defences along the 600-mile front line, some stretching back 30 kilometres. Ukrainian forces are having to clear them trench by trench. It's proving a grinding, slow and costly process. And without air cover, they're reliant on artillery to suppress Russian positions. Cluster bombs are lethal against dug-in troops. A US Army study said they were 4 times as effective as single shells.
If you fire just a more simple HE round, high explosive tube artillery round, say for the Russians of 152, that has like 33 pounds of explosive, but it's just one round about this big that goes on to the target like that. But if you fired a cluster munition out of that same round with a bunch of little bomblets in it, and it opens up in the air, you get a much wider range of coverage.
For Ukraine, the other positive is the impact on their limited number of 155mm howitzers. With a more effective munition, they'll be able to fire them less, conserving ammunition and the life of the gun. That in turn will allow Kyiv to fight for longer, while it waits for NATO countries to ramp up artillery shell production. The cluster munition is made up of a casing containing more than 80 bomblets, which are ejected at a set point in the shell's trajectory. Each bomblet is about the size of a hand grenade and has a shaped charge that can kill infantry, but also penetrate light-skinned vehicles. Each one has a kill zone of around 10 square meters. As well as being deadly, the US Army says cluster munitions also help reduce the chances of counter-battery fire because they destroy targets faster, allowing the gun crew to move before their location is triangulated by the enemy.
The Ukrainians are in the midst of their counteroffensive. It's been hard sledding because the Russians had 6 months to dig in, and so those defensive belts that the Russians have put in place in the east and the south are hard. They'd be hard for any military to punch through. And so we want to make sure that the Ukrainians have sufficient artillery to keep them in the fight in the context of the current counteroffensive. And because things are going a little slower than some had hoped, there are very high expenditures of artillery rates. So this is to make sure that the Ukrainians have the confidence that they have what they need, but frankly also that the Russians know that the Ukrainians are going to stay in the game.
The US started phasing out cluster munitions in 2016, but the Pentagon says it still has hundreds of thousands of these lower dud rate DPICMs. While 120 countries have banned them, the US, Russia and Ukraine haven't. The Pentagon says it's supplying Kyiv with the most modern cluster munitions it has, and unlike Russia, its weaponry won't be used indiscriminately. For Ukraine, these will buy time, and it's hoped provide the tactical punch it needs to launch the next stage of its counteroffensive. Simon Newton, Forces News. Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.